It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in the small town of Ridgewood. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle, and Jake's backyard stretched out like an endless field of possibilities. Jake, a curious 16-year-old, had decided to spend his day trying out his newest hobby, treasure hunting. Armed with an old, slightly rusty metal detector he had found in the attic, he hoped to find something interesting buried beneath the soil. Jake wandered around the yard, sweeping the detector from side to side. The machine beeped occasionally, but it was always just a nail, a soda can tab, or a piece of scrap metal. He sighed, feeling a little disappointed. "Maybe this thing doesn't even work," he muttered. Just as he was about to give up, the detector let out a sharp, piercing beep, much louder than before. Startled, Jake stopped in his tracks. The sound was coming from beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the yard. He knelt down and swept the detector over the area again. The beeping grew even louder, almost frantic. "What's this?" Jake whispered to himself. His heart raced with excitement as he grabbed a small gardening spade from the porch. Kneeling under the tree, he began to dig. The soil was dry and hard, but Jake didn't mind. Each scoop of dirt brought him closer to uncovering the mysterious object. After a few minutes, the spade hit something solid. Jake's hands trembled as he brushed the dirt away. Slowly, a metallic object came into view. It was small, about the size of a baseball, and perfectly round. The surface was smooth and gleamed faintly, even in the shade of the tree. Strange markings, almost like symbols or writing, were etched across it. "What is this thing?" Jake murmured, lifting it carefully. As soon as his fingers touched the object, it began to glow. A soft blue light pulsed from within, and the symbols lit up one by one. Jake felt a strange vibration in his hand, like the object was alive. Suddenly, a low humming sound filled the air. It was faint but steady, as if the object was trying to communicate. Jake's eyes widened. "This can't be real," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned the object over, searching for a clue about what it might be. But the symbols made no sense to him. They weren't in any language he had ever seen. Before he could think further, the humming grew louder. Then, to Jake's shock, a voice, soft and faint, spoke. "Help me," it said. The words were barely audible, but they sent chills down Jake's spine. He dropped the object in surprise, and it landed softly in the grass. The light faded, and the humming stopped. Jake looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and tell him it was all a prank. But there was no one. The yard was as quiet as ever, with only the sound of birds chirping in the distance. He picked up the object again, his curiosity overpowering his fear. "Help you? Who are you?" Jake asked, feeling a little foolish for talking to what looked like a glowing metal ball. There was no response. The object remained silent, as if it had gone back to sleep. Jake sat back on his heels, staring at the object in his hands. He didn't know what it was, but he was sure of one thing. It wasn't from this world. The symbols, the glow, the voice, it all felt too strange, too alien. He stood up and carried the object into his house, carefully wrapping it in an old towel. Once inside, Jake placed it on his desk and sat down, staring at it like it might suddenly come to life. His mind raced with questions. What was this thing? Where had it come from? And most importantly, who, or what, was asking for help? That night, Jake lay in bed, unable to sleep. The glowing sphere sat on his desk, its faint light casting strange shadows on the walls. Jake kept thinking about the voice he had heard. It hadn't sounded threatening or scary. If anything, it sounded scared, like someone in trouble. At midnight, as Jake was finally drifting off to sleep, a soft humming sound filled the room. His eyes snapped open, and he saw the sphere glowing brighter than before. The symbols were lighting up again, one by one, and the hum grew louder. "Help me." The voice whispered again, clearer this time. Jake sat up, his heart pounding. "Who are you? What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaky. The light from the sphere suddenly grew so bright that Jake had to shield his eyes. Then, as quickly as it started, the light faded, leaving the room in darkness. Jake blinked, trying to adjust his vision. The sphere sat silently on the desk, looking as lifeless as ever. But Jake knew better now. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't lifeless. It was alive, or at least connected to something somewhere, and it needed his help. Jake stared at the sphere, his determination growing. "I don't know what you are," he said softly, "but I'm going to find out." Little did Jake know, this was only the beginning of an adventure that would change his life, and possibly the fate of the entire world. The girl in the sphere. The night was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that made Jake's skin crawl. The glowing sphere sat on his desk, faintly humming like a heartbeat. It had been hours since Jake had last heard the mysterious voice. He sat on his bed, his eyes glued to this strange object, his mind racing with questions. Out of nowhere, the hum stopped, replaced by an electric crackle. Sparks of light flickered around the sphere, and Jake jumped to his feet. "What now?" he muttered, cautiously stepping closer. Before he could touch it, a beam of light shot out from the sphere and painted the room with swirling, ghostly blue patterns. Jake stumbled back, watching in awe as the patterns morphed into shapes. Something was forming in front of him. Within seconds, the swirling lights condensed into a figure. Standing in the middle of Jake's small room was a girl, or at least something that looked like one. She was translucent, glowing faintly like the sphere, and her form shimmered as if she were made of liquid light. Her large, almond-shaped eyes scanned the room before settling on Jake. She was no older than Jake, her features delicate yet otherworldly. A strange, silvery tattoo-like marking ran across her forehead, glowing faintly. "Don't be afraid," the girl said, her voice soft and musical, like a melody carried by the wind. "I mean no harm." Jake's jaw dropped. He tried to say something, but all that came out was a stammer. "Who? What? How are you here?" "I am Mira," she said, bowing her head slightly. "And I am trapped." Jake blinked, trying to process what he was seeing and hearing. "Trapped? Trapped where?" "You're standing right here." Mira shook her head. "What you see is a projection, a shadow of myself. My true form is far away, locked in stasis. The device you found, the sphere, is the only way I can communicate." Jake hesitated, his curiosity battling with the unease creeping up his spine. "You're alien, aren't you?" Mira's lips curled into a small smile, though it looked tired. "You could say that. I am from a place your kind has not yet imagined. My ship crashed near your planet a long time ago, and I have been stranded ever since." "Wait," Jake interrupted, his voice rising. "You're saying aliens have been here this whole time? Why haven't we seen you? Why haven't you done anything?" "I did not come to harm," Mira said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I came seeking refuge, but my presence was discovered by others. Your kind, but not like you." Her gaze darkened, and the shimmering glow around her dimmed slightly. "They found my ship and took everything they could. They want my technology, not knowing the danger it holds." Jake frowned. "Danger? What kind of danger?" Mira hesitated, as if weighing how much she should tell him. "My ship carries a core, a powerful energy source that could tear your world apart if misused. It was never meant for war, but in the wrong hands." Her words trailed off, leaving an ominous silence hanging in the air. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. "So, what do you need from me?" Mira stepped closer, her form flickering slightly. "I need your help. The sphere you found is the key to unlocking my ship's systems. Without it, I cannot leave this planet, and the ones who hunt me will find the core. You must protect the sphere at all costs." Jake ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small room. "Hold on a second. This is insane. I'm just a kid. I can't stop some secret alien hunting government group. I don't even know what I'm dealing with here." "You have a kind heart," Mira said, her voice steady but urgent. "And you are braver than you think. I chose you because you have the potential to help me. If you do nothing, they will find me, and your world will suffer." Jake stopped pacing and looked at her. Despite the strangeness of the situation, there was something in her voice, in her eyes, that made him believe her. "Fine," he said after a moment, exhaling deeply. "I'll help you. But you need to tell me everything. How they're hunting you, what they want, and what I need to do." Mira nodded. "I will tell you all I can. But for now, you must hide the sphere. They are close." Jake's stomach dropped. "Wait, what do you mean close?" Before Mira could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed outside his window. Jake froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he turned toward the sound and saw the silhouettes of two men, their figures barely visible in the moonlight. They were scanning the yard with strange, glowing devices. "They found you," Mira whispered. "Hide the sphere. Quickly." Jake grabbed the sphere and stuffed it into his backpack. His mind raced as he turned to Mira. "What about you?" Her form flickered again, her glow dimming. "I am only a projection. They cannot see me, but they will not stop until they have the sphere." Jake slung the backpack over his shoulder and darted to his closet, hiding just as the men knocked on the front door. His breath came in shallow gasps as he heard his mom answering the door. "Stay hidden," Mira's voice whispered faintly in his mind. "And trust no one." Jake didn't know what he had just gotten himself into, but one thing was clear: this was no ordinary treasure hunt. The shadowy visitors. The faint knock on the door echoed through the silent house, sending a jolt of fear straight to Jake's heart. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows of his closet, clutching the backpack tightly against his chest. Inside, the sphere felt heavier than ever, its faint glow barely visible through the fabric. From his hiding spot, he could hear his mom's voice, calm but curious. "Who's there?" "We're with the Special Survey Division," a man replied, his voice smooth yet cold. "We're conducting routine checks in the neighborhood. May we come in?" Jake held his breath. The sound of boots stepping into the house made his stomach twist. He peeked through the crack in the closet door, straining to hear the conversation. "Routine checks?" his mom asked. "What's this about?" "We're investigating reports of unusual energy activity in the area," the man said. His tone was polite, but there was an unsettling edge to it. "Our equipment detected a spike near this property." Jake's chest tightened. They knew. Somehow, they'd tracked the sphere. He could almost feel its faint hum against his skin, as if it were alive and panicking alongside him. His mom chuckled nervously. "Energy activity? I'm not sure what you mean. We don't even have fancy appliances, let alone—" "Ma'am," the man interrupted, "we'd like to take a quick look around, just to rule out any anomalies. It won't take long." Jake cursed under his breath. He had to do something. If they found the sphere, it was over, not just for him, but for Mira, and maybe for the world. The sound of heavy boots echoed closer. Jake could see their shadows through the gap beneath his bedroom door. His heart thudded loudly, the sound almost deafening in the silence. The doorknob turned. "Wait," his mom called out from the hallway. "Is this really necessary? My son's asleep in there." One of the men hesitated, but the other replied in that same icy tone. "We won't disturb him, ma'am. It's important." The door creaked open, and Jake's room was bathed in the harsh glow of a flashlight. He bit his lip to keep from gasping as the beam swept over his desk, his bed, and finally, the closet. The sphere hummed faintly, as if sensing the danger. Jake pressed a hand over it, willing it to stay silent. The flashlight beam lingered on the closet door, and Jake could hear one of the men muttering something under his breath. A moment later, the doorknob rattled. Jake's pulse raced. His grip on the backpack tightened as he prepared to make a run for it. But just as the door started to open, a loud crash came from the kitchen. "What was that?" one of the men barked. "I don't know," his partner replied. "Stay here. I'll check it out." The flashlight beam jerked away, and the door clicked shut. Jake exhaled shakily, his body trembling with adrenaline. He didn't know what had caused the noise, but he wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Quietly, he eased the closet door open and slipped out. Mira's voice, soft and urgent, filled his mind. "They will find you if you stay. You must leave now." Jake nodded to himself. He grabbed his sneakers, shoved them on, and slung the backpack over his shoulder. His bedroom window was slightly ajar, just enough for him to squeeze through. He pushed it open and climbed out, landing in the flowered below with a soft thud. The cool night air hit him like a slap. He didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to get as far away as possible. He darted toward the fence at the back of the yard, his mind racing. Where could he go? Who could he trust? Behind him, the front door slammed open. "He's not in the house," a voice growled. "He's close. Spread out." Jake ducked behind the old oak tree, his breaths coming fast and shallow. He could see the men now, tall, dressed in dark suits, their faces obscured by shadows. They carried strange devices that beeped and flashed with eerie green light. The sphere in his backpack pulsed faintly, as if reacting to their presence. "Over here," one of them shouted. The device in his hand lit up like a beacon, pointing directly toward Jake's hiding spot. Jake didn't think. He ran. The men shouted behind him, their heavy boots pounding against the ground. Jake's sneakers slipped on the dewy grass as he sprinted toward the woods at the edge of the neighborhood. His lungs burned, and his legs screamed for rest. But he didn't dare stop. Mira's voice echoed in his head. "You must keep moving. They cannot catch you." "Yeah, no kidding." Jake gasped, weaving through the trees. He could hear the men crashing through the underbrush, their strange devices still beeping. Suddenly, the sphere vibrated violently in his backpack. Jake skidded to a halt, nearly tripping over a fallen branch. The vibration grew stronger, and then a bright flash erupted from the sphere, blindingly white and impossibly bright. The men shouted in confusion, their voices drowned out by a high-pitched hum. Jake shielded his eyes, stumbling backward. When the light faded, the woods were silent. The men were gone. Jake stood there, panting, his hands trembling as he reached into his backpack. The sphere was warm to the touch, its glow softer now, almost calm. "What just happened?" he whispered aloud, but Mira didn't answer. The sphere remained silent. Jake swallowed hard and looked around. The woods stretched out in all directions, dark and unfamiliar. He had no idea where to go next, but one thing was certain: this wasn't over. Not even close. The hidden ship. The abandoned junkyard lay on the outskirts of Ridgewood, a place most people avoided. It was a maze of rusting cars, piles of scrap metal, and broken machinery. Jake stood at the entrance, his breath visible in the cool night air. The sphere in his backpack vibrated faintly, its glow visible through the fabric. Mira's voice, calm but insistent, echoed in his mind. "The fragment of my ship is here. We must retrieve it before they do." Jake tightened his grip on the straps of his backpack. "You're sure about this?" he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. He hadn't seen the men in black suits since the incident in the woods, but the fear of being followed lingered. His every nerve was on edge. "I am certain," Mira replied. "The signal is strong. The fragment is essential to repairing my ship." Jake exhaled slowly, steeling himself before stepping into the junkyard. The crunch of gravel under his sneakers seemed deafening in the stillness. Towering heaps of twisted metal loomed around him, casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. The sphere hummed softly, guiding him like a compass. As he moved deeper into the junkyard, the sound grew louder, more urgent. Jake climbed over a stack of rusted pipes, nearly losing his footing, and landed in a clearing surrounded by old, broken-down vehicles. "This place looks like something out of a horror movie," Jake muttered, scanning his surroundings. The sphere pulsed in response, its light brighter now. Ahead, a large, partially covered object caught his attention. The tarp draped over it flapped lightly in the breeze, revealing flashes of smooth metallic silver beneath. Jake's pulse quickened. He approached cautiously, pulling the tarp aside. Underneath was a piece of Mira's ship, unmistakably alien. Its surface shimmered like liquid, reflecting the faint light in strange, shifting patterns. Intricate markings, similar to those on the sphere, covered the metal. "This is it," Jake whispered, reaching out to touch it. The surface was cold, but it vibrated faintly, like it was alive. "Good," Mira's voice said, relief evident in her tone. "This fragment contains the core stabilizer. Without it, I cannot regain full control of my ship." Jake nodded. "Okay, now what? How do we?" A loud crash interrupted him. Jake froze, his heart pounding. The sound of boots crunching on gravel echoed through the junkyard. Flashlights pierced the darkness, their beams cutting through the maze of scrap. "They're here," Mira's voice warned. "You must hide. Quickly." Jake shoved the fragment into his backpack, grunting as the added weight strained his shoulders. He darted behind a stack of old car doors, crouching low as the flashlights swept past. The men's voices were cold and methodical. "The signal is strongest here," one of them said. "Spread out." Jake bit his lip, trying to steady his breathing. He peeked around the corner, spotting 3 men in black suits, their strange devices glowing with green light. They moved with precision, scanning every pile of scrap, every shadow. "They cannot find the fragment," Mira urged. "If they do, they will use it to activate my ship's core. It will destroy everything." Jake's chest tightened. He couldn't let them win, but what could he do? He was just a kid, armed with nothing but a glowing sphere and a backpack full of alien tech. One of the men stopped suddenly, his device beeping rapidly. "Over here," he called out, turning toward the clearing where Jake had found the fragment. Jake knew he had to act fast. If they found the ship piece, it was over. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the sphere. Its glow intensified, almost as if it knew what was coming. "Mira, I hope you've got a plan," Jake whispered. "Trust me," she replied. "Hold the sphere high and throw it as far as you can." "What? Are you crazy?" Jake hissed. "Do it, Jake. Now." Jake hesitated for only a second before standing up, gripping the sphere tightly. He hurled it toward a stack of scrap on the far side of the yard. The sphere soared through the air, landing with a loud clang. The instant it hit the ground, a blinding flash of light erupted from it, accompanied by an ear-splitting hum. The men shouted in confusion, their flashlights swinging wildly. Jake didn't wait to see what happened next. He bolted, weaving through the maze of junk, his heart hammering in his chest. The men were too distracted by the sphere's display to notice him slipping away. "The sphere will return to you," Mira assured him as he ran. "It is bonded to you now." Sure enough, as Jake reached the edge of the junkyard, the sphere reappeared in his backpack, its glow dim but steady. He didn't stop running until he was far from the junkyard, his legs aching and lungs burning. Finally, he collapsed under a streetlight, clutching the backpack tightly. "That was too close," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You did well, Jake," Mira said. "But this is only the beginning. The real fight is still ahead." Jake looked up at the night sky, the stars shining faintly above. For the first time, he realized just how small he was in the grand scheme of things, and how much was now at stake. "I hope you're worth it," he said softly, standing up and disappearing into the shadows. Trust and betrayal. The sound of tools clinking filled the dimly lit garage. Jake and Emma were huddled over the alien fragment, its shimmering surface glowing faintly under the overhead lamp. Jake had finally told her everything. About the sphere, Mira, and the hunters. It was risky, but he needed help, and Emma was the only person he trusted. "This is insane," Emma whispered, her wide eyes fixed on the fragment. "You're telling me this thing is part of an alien spaceship, and these government guys are after you?" Jake nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And if we don't figure out how to put this back together, Mira's ship will stay dead, and the hunters will get everything they want." Emma shook her head in disbelief. "This is way beyond crazy, Jake." "But—" She paused, glancing at him. "I'm in. Let's figure this out." Jake felt a wave of relief. Emma had always been the smart one, the one who could make sense of things he couldn't. If anyone could help him repair the alien technology, it was her. Using Mira's guidance, the two worked tirelessly, attaching wires, adjusting panels, and carefully aligning the fragment with the sphere. Mira's voice, calm and patient, gave them instructions from within Jake's mind. "The stabilizer needs to align with the core frequency," she explained. "Without it, the ship's power cannot regenerate." "What does that even mean?" Jake muttered, tightening the screw. "It means don't mess it up," Emma teased, giving him a small smile. "Relax. We've got this." For a moment, things felt almost normal, like they were just two kids working on a school project. But the weight of the situation hung heavy over them. Every sound outside made Jake jump, convinced the hunters were closing in. As they worked, Emma asked, "Why didn't you come to me sooner? You've been dealing with this alone for days." Jake hesitated, his hands pausing over the fragment. "I didn't want to drag you into it." "It's dangerous, Emma. They're not playing around." Emma rolled her eyes. "You think I'd let you handle this alone?" "Come on, Jake. We're a team. We always have been." Her words brought a small smile to Jake's face. For the first time in days, he felt like he wasn't completely alone. But that feeling didn't last. Hours later, the fragment hummed to life. Its glow intensified, matching the light from the sphere. Jake and Emma stepped back, shielding their eyes as the two pieces resonated together. Mira's voice rang clear in Jake's mind. "It is working. The stabilizer is active. But there is more to be done. We must retrieve the ship's core." Jake nodded, his excitement tempered by exhaustion. "Where is it?" Before Mira could respond, a loud crash echoed from the garage door. Both Jake and Emma froze as the door rattled violently. "They found us," Jake whispered, panic rising in his chest. Emma grabbed a wrench, holding it like a weapon. "What do we do?" The door burst open, and three men in black suits stormed in, their strange devices glowing ominously. One of them pointed a scanner at Jake. "The signal's strongest here. He has the fragment." "Run," Jake yelled, grabbing the backpack and pulling Emma toward the back door. But as they ran, Jake noticed Emma hesitate. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression conflicted. "Emma, come on," he shouted. One of the men stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have to do this. Emma, just hand it over." Jake skidded to a halt, his heart sinking. What's he talking about?" Emma turned to Jake, her eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Jake's stomach dropped. "You told them." "I didn't know they'd." Emma's voice cracked. "I thought they'd help. I thought they'd stop you from getting hurt. I didn't know they'd come after you like this." The men closed in, their devices beeping faster as they approached. Jake stared at Emma, betrayal washing over him. "You sold me out." "Jake, No," he snapped, stepping back. "Stay away from me." Before the men could grab him, the sphere in Jake's backpack flared to life. A blinding light filled the garage, and a shockwave sent everyone flying backward. Jake hit the ground hard, his ears ringing. When he opened his eyes, he saw Emma lying a few feet away, tears streaming down her face. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake didn't answer. He grabbed the sphere and ran, ignoring her calls. The men were still recovering, but he knew they wouldn't stay down for long. He sprinted into the night, his mind racing. Jake didn't stop running until he reached the edge of town. His legs burned, and his lungs felt like they might burst, but he kept going. He collapsed behind an old warehouse, clutching the sphere tightly. "You must not lose hope," Mira's voice said gently. "I chose you because I believed in your strength. Do not let this break you." Jake laughed bitterly. "Strength? I can't even trust my best friend." "Trust is fragile," Mira replied, "but it can be rebuilt. Focus on the task ahead. The core is within reach, but the journey will only get harder." Jake stared at the sphere, its glow casting faint shadows on his face. His world had fallen apart in a matter of days, but one thing was clear: he couldn't give up now. Not when so much was at stake. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's finish this." The final stand. The old industrial complex stood like a fortress against the night sky, its towering smokestacks casting long shadows over the empty streets. Jake crouched behind a rusted metal dumpster, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the faint glow of the alien core through the cracked windows of the building, pulsing like a heartbeat. The hunters had found it, and they were trying to activate it. Mira's voice filled his mind, steady but urgent. "The core is dangerous in their hands. If they succeed in unlocking its power, your planet will not survive." Jake tightened his grip on the sphere in his hand, its glow faint but comforting. No pressure or anything, he muttered under his breath. He glanced at Emma, who knelt beside him, her face pale but determined. Despite her earlier betrayal, she had come back, begging for a chance to make things right. "I don't trust you," Jake had told her, his voice cold. "I don't blame you," Emma had replied, her eyes filled with guilt. "But I know how they work. I can help." Now, as they crouched in the shadows, Jake was still unsure if he'd made the right decision. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. The hunters were inside, and they were getting closer to unleashing a power that could destroy everything. "We'll sneak in through the side entrance," Emma whispered, pointing to a small door partially obscured by debris. "They'll have most of their focus on the main chamber." Jake nodded, clutching the sphere tightly. Together, they crept toward the door, staying low and silent. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. Inside, the building was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. Faint voices echoed through the halls, along with the rhythmic hum of the alien core. Jake's skin prickled as they moved closer, the energy in the air growing stronger with every step. Emma stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "Wait," she whispered. She pointed to a small device mounted on the wall, a motion sensor, its red light blinking ominously. Jake frowned. "Can you disable it?" Emma nodded, pulling a small multi-tool from her pocket. "Give me a minute." As she worked, Jake scanned the corridor, his nerves on edge. The sphere in his hand grew warmer, its hum matching the rhythm of the core. Mira's voice spoke again, soft but firm. "They are ahead, in the central chamber. You must act quickly. The core is unstable." Jake swallowed hard. What happens if it destabilizes completely? "The energy release will tear through your atmosphere. Nothing will survive." Jake's stomach twisted, but he nodded. "Then we don't let that happen." Emma finished disabling the sensor, and they continued forward. The corridor opened into a massive chamber, its walls lined with monitors and alien machinery. In the center of the room was the core, a glowing crystalline sphere suspended in a metal frame. Its light pulsed erratically, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The hunters were gathered around it, their strange devices connected to the core. They worked with precision, their voices low and serious. Jake and Emma ducked behind a console, watching as one of the hunters, taller than the others, with an air of authority, stepped forward. He held a sleek, black device in his hand, its surface glowing with alien symbols. "The core is responding," the man said, his voice calm but triumphant. "We're almost there." Jake felt a surge of panic. "Mira, what do we do?" he whispered. "The core must be neutralized," she replied. "The sphere contains the override code. Place it in the control panel below the core. But be careful. The hunters will not let you succeed." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath. He turned to Emma. "I need you to create a distraction." Emma hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Got it. Just don't get yourself killed." Before Jake could respond, Emma grabbed a piece of metal from the floor and hurled it across the room. The loud clang echoed through the chamber, and the hunters spun toward the noise, their weapons drawn. "Now," Mira urged. Jake sprinted toward the core, staying low as the hunters shouted and scattered. He reached the control panel, a sleek alien console covered in glowing symbols. The sphere pulsed in his hand, as if guiding him. He placed it in a small indentation on the console, and the symbols lit up, rearranging themselves into a complex pattern. "What are you doing?" the lead hunter roared, spotting Jake. He raised his weapon, but Emma tackled him from the side, knocking him off balance. "Just finish it," Emma yelled, struggling to hold him back. Jake's fingers flew over the console, following Mira's instructions. The core's light grew brighter, and the humming intensified, filling the chamber with a deafening roar. Suddenly, a surge of energy erupted from the core, throwing everyone to the ground. Jake shielded his face as the light engulfed the room. When it finally dimmed, the core's glow had faded, and the room was silent. "It is done," Mira said softly. "The core has been neutralized." Jake staggered to his feet, his legs shaking. The hunters lay unconscious, their devices shattered. Emma was on the floor, breathing heavily but alive. Jake retrieved the sphere, its glow faint but steady. He turned to Emma, offering her a hand. "Let's get out of here." She took it, her grip firm. "We did it," she said, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. Jake nodded, but his expression was grim. For now. As they disappeared into the night, the faint hum of the sphere reminded Jake that the fight wasn't over. The ship was still out there, and the hunters wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But for the first time, Jake felt like they had a chance. The sacrifice. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and electricity. The ruins of the industrial complex smoldered in the distance, a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Jake and Emma stood at the edge of the clearing where Mira's ship lay hidden, a sleek, silvery structure half buried in the earth, its surface still shimmering faintly with alien light. The sphere in Jake's hand pulsed weakly, its glow fading with each passing second. Mira's voice, faint and strained, echoed in his mind. "This is it, Jake, the final step. The ship needs the core to activate fully, but it will require all of my energy to stabilize the process." Jake's chest tightened. He'd known this moment was coming, but the weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. "What happens to you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I will not survive," Mira replied. Her tone was calm, almost peaceful. "My essence is bound to the sphere. Once the ship is functional, the energy required to stabilize the core will consume what remains of me." "No," Jake said, shaking his head. "There has to be another way. You can't just—" "There is no other way," Mira interrupted gently. "You have done more than I could have ever hoped for, Jake. But now, the choice is yours. You can leave the core dormant, and I will remain. Or you can activate the ship and give your world a chance to survive." Emma placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, her expression somber. "Jake, it's not fair, but she's right. If the hunters get the core again—" Jake clenched his fists, the weight of the decision crushing him. He looked down at the sphere, its faint glow reflecting his conflicted face. "You don't deserve this," he said softly. "You've been through enough." "This is my purpose," Mira said. "My people sent me to protect others, even at great cost. You have shown me that humanity is worth saving." Jake swallowed hard, his vision blurring with tears. "You're not just some machine, Mira. You're my friend." "And you are mine," Mira said, her voice warm despite its fragility. "Now let us finish this. Together." Jake stepped forward, the sphere in his hands trembling as he approached the ship. The entry hatch slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a glowing chamber at the heart of the vessel. The core's housing stood in the center, a crystalline cradle waiting for the sphere. Emma stayed back, watching silently as Jake climbed into the ship. "You've got this," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Jake reached the core's housing and hesitated. His mind raced, filled with memories of everything that had happened. The moment he found the sphere, the nights he spent hearing Mira's voice, the dangers they had faced together. He took a deep breath, placing the sphere into the cradle. The ship came alive. Lights flared to life, and a deep, resonant hum filled the chamber. The walls shimmered with flowing symbols, and the core began to spin, its energy stabilizing. Jake felt a surge of warmth in his chest, like a final goodbye. "Thank you, Jake," Mira whispered, her voice barely audible now. "You were my hope." The glow from the sphere faded completely, and Jake felt an emptiness he couldn't describe. The chamber's light dimmed, signaling that the process was complete. Jake sank to his knees, staring at the now dormant sphere. "Goodbye, Mira," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'll never forget you." Outside, the ship began to lift, its sleek form rising slowly into the sky. Emma ran to Jake as he emerged from the hatch, helping him to his feet. Together, they watched as the ship ascended, its light illuminating the night. "What now?" Emma asked softly. Jake stared at the sky, his heart heavy but resolute. "We make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. We keep this world safe. For her." As the ship disappeared into the stars, Jake felt a sense of both loss and purpose. Mira was gone, but her legacy would endure. The world she had given her life to protect was still standing, and Jake would do everything in his power to honor her gift. Epilogue. Weeks later, Jake stood beneath the old oak tree in his backyard, the place where it all began. In his hand was a small, glowing seed, left behind by the ship as it departed. He planted it in the soil, watching as its light pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He smiled sadly, knowing that Mira's story wasn't over. Her memory would live on, not just in the seed, but in him and in the world she had saved. The camera panned to the seed as a small sprout emerged, its glow growing brighter with each passing moment. The screen faded to black, leaving the audience with a simple, poignant message. Even in the darkest moments, hope can take root.